Hey guys, and recently, Nintendo has made a lot of really weird, sometimes anti-consumer decisions, so a lot of people have been critical of Nintendo. So I think it's important to talk about why this criticism is important, and why having nuance along with criticism is also important as well, and how this differs from people who are blindly hating on Nintendo, and people who are toxic about it, which is not okay. But what is okay is for people to voice their criticism for Nintendo. There are reasons and justifications for why people are critical of Nintendo. It shows that people genuinely care about Nintendo and want them to improve. Demeech and I are undeniably Nintendo fans. Like, we play a ton of Nintendo games and really enjoy them, and just want to see Nintendo be at their best. We want to see Nintendo making good decisions, and making decisions that benefit the consumer rather than harm them. So when we criticize Nintendo, we are not blindly hating on them. I see a ton of people say, ugh, Demeech is blindly hating on Nintendo, but if he really blindly hated on Nintendo, he wouldn't have flown all the way out to Dallas to try out the Nintendo Switch 2 and get his honest thoughts on the Switch 2. Like, his criticism for Nintendo is genuinely really honest and out of the fact that he's a Nintendo fan. And I think that's really important to realize for anyone who is critical of Nintendo, and if you are a big fan of Nintendo, it is completely okay to criticize them if you're not okay with certain aspects of them. And it also shows that they don't blindly support everything Nintendo does as a company. I think that's another kind of component of being a good fan. Like, not blindly supporting everything that the company does, because at the end of the day, the company is not your friend. And money is in their interest quite a lot of the time, not always the consumer. So you really shouldn't blindly do everything that a company does, or blindly follow everything that a company does, because they are a company at the end of the day. Even if you like a lot of their products, that doesn't mean their decisions will always be good. So, I think it's very justified to be critical of Nintendo while also being a fan. And there are also a lot of reasons to be critical of Nintendo right now. The cost of games is really high. Nintendo raised the bar really high for the price of video games. Since Mario Kart World is $80, and we're already seeing other companies follow suit, like Microsoft. And it's another discussion to say whether Nintendo was responsible for this or not, but it's still justified for people to be critical and frustrated with this price. And also with the fact that Nintendo is seemingly harming the physical games market right now with things like game key cards. I know that's also third-party companies that are responsible for that, but I think people should be justifiably critical of Nintendo over the decision of creating the game key cards and emphasizing digital games when physical games still have been popular for Nintendo. There still is a pretty high share of people buying physical games for Nintendo. I know that's a discussion for another day, but it's like people are justifiably frustrated about that decision, so I think the criticism is justified here. And then there's also things like features locked behind Nintendo Switch Online, like game chat. I mean, I guess that's kind of debatable whether you think that should be a feature a part of Nintendo Switch Online or not, but the people who are critical of it definitely are valid to have that criticism. And then also other things like Nintendo Switch 2 editions, not including DLC. So there are a lot of reasons why people are critical of Nintendo right now. A lot of justifiable reasons right now. This isn't just blind hate. People have reasons why they are critical, and why they are voicing their opinions against some of Nintendo's business practices, because there are some really weird decisions going on right now. But when you are criticizing Nintendo, I think there's some important things to keep in mind when you are doing it. Like, The facts are important. It's important to have some truth to what you are saying. Try not to have too many holes or contradictions in your argument. I mean, you might slip up sometimes, that's natural, but try not to spread misinformation. I have seen a ton of videos that both critical and people who are like blindly hating on Nintendo, who are spreading misinformation. Some people who are critical don't even realize they are spreading misinformation, and it's just due to the fact that they're kind of overwhelmed by this information. So I think when you are criticizing Nintendo, I think it's important to get the facts right and to do a little research ahead of time, because there's a lot of misinformation spreading around. And the thing is, even though it is important for a lot of people to criticize Nintendo right now, that misinformation will not help your case. I know people are saying, anything against Nintendo will help right now, but not really. Not really. Because misinformation just allows people to poke holes in your argument and just makes your argument kind of fall flat. And it doesn't really help your case at all. It just makes your argument look weaker. It takes some truth away from it. It makes it look less genuine. So it really should be important to get the facts right when you are criticizing. And another thing to realize is that Nintendo is a company and not an individual, so you don't need to treat Nintendo like an individual. You don't have to really, sometimes if you feel like it, you don't have to hold back if you feel like you have to. So it's fine that you're treating Nintendo like a company and not an individual. And another thing is try to find problems that other people haven't addressed before. I've seen so many videos that are really repetitive because they bring up the same points that other people have. That especially goes for things like Paper Mario, like when people were criticizing the modern Paper Mario games, they brought up the same points over and over again. Try not to be like that. Try to find some problems that other people haven't brought up. Or at least, if you're bringing up some of the same issues, try to explain them in ways that other people haven't, or try to find more evidence to back up your claims. I think that's important. And then, finally, I think it's also important to recognize that the main problem with Nintendo is Nintendo as a company, not necessarily Nintendo as a developer. I mean, sure, you can have your problems with the games themselves, but most of the decisions right now with Nintendo involve them as a company, and don't really have to do with the developers, because the developers are doing an amazing job for the most part with these games. I think these games look excellent, just with how they're being developed, like Donkey Kong Bonanza and Mario Kart World, because while their prices may be egregious, that isn't the developer's fault. That's Nintendo as a company. That's the financial side of Nintendo there. That's not really the game developer's fault, why these games are expensive. So don't blame the developers for Nintendo's anti-consumer practices. So now I've gone over, like, what makes good Nintendo criticism. Now I wanted to go over what is not okay and what can come across as blind hate to people, and what is kind of a problem. One problem is mocking people for being excited about the Nintendo Switch 2. That is not going to solve anything. That just comes across as toxic, and it really isn't a good thing to do. Because I think a lot of people who are excited about the Nintendo Switch 2 are also critical. That's kind of how I am. Like, I am excited, but also critical of some aspects. I think it's perfectly reasonable for people to be like that. Like, it's a brand new Nintendo console, of course people are going to be excited about it. And then also acting like people are a part of the problem for buying a Nintendo Switch 2. Spoiler alert, they aren't. Acting like the consumer is the problem rather than the large corporation is an issue. Don't unleash your anger onto random fans. That isn't going to help anything. That just makes you look toxic. People who made up their minds to buy the system aren't going to change it, especially for the people where the value of the game outweighs the cost for that person. even if you don't agree, and even if most people think the pricing for some of these games are egregious. Just don't unleash your anger on the fans. That just makes you look toxic. Channel that anger into something more productive, calling out Nintendo themselves. Because if someone else is gonna buy a game, that doesn't mean you have to buy the game. So you don't have to push your anger and frustration onto other people. If you make like a video or a post calling out Nintendo, you're probably gonna have other people gravitate you and agree with you. You don't have to push that onto other people. And then finally, I think posting blind hate and Ragebait is kind of a problem. People who spread a lot of misinformation within their videos and don't care about it because they just blindly hate. That is the point where it isn't criticism anymore, and it's just people blindly hating. I mean, sure, some people do it out of understandable reasons and understandable frustration, but a lot of these blind hate videos that are being spread around really isn't helping people's case, and really doesn't seem like true criticism for Nintendo. And at the same time, I think that there's some problems on the other side as well. And for the people who think that criticism is rage bait, I think that is kind of a problem too. I really think people shouldn't assume that all criticism of Nintendo is rage bait. A lot of criticism is genuine and comes out of a very nuanced and well thought out place. So I think that's important to keep that in mind. And I also think it's a problem that some people are lumping in people who are nuanced about their criticism, like Demeach and Nintending, with people who blindly hate on Nintendo or post rage bait. There is a clear difference between these people. So I really think people shouldn't just lump everyone saying something somewhat negative about Nintendo together, because some people are very nuanced and have very well thought out videos about their criticism, like I mentioned with Demeach and Nintending, while others have videos that are kind of substanceless and are more blindly hating on Nintendo. So I think there's a clear difference between those two types of videos. And then finally, I think people really shouldn't judge a book by its cover. If you see a video that you think is rage bait, don't automatically assume that it is. At least watch a little bit of it, and try to form an opinion about it based on, like, just a little bit of the video. Because they may have more nuanced criticism than you think. I've seen this happen a million times with Demeach's videos, because Demeach usually has a very nuanced and well thought out take, but people look at his thumbnails and think he's blindly hating on Nintendo. And I think that's an issue, because it's kind of spreading a narrative that criticism towards Nintendo is the same thing as blind hate, even if people don't really mean to kind of create that narrative. It's kind of forming because of people who are blindly judging these thumbnails and not actually watching the video. But anyways, those are my thoughts on Nintendo criticism. I think it's important to be critical of Nintendo if you have some problems with them, but at the same time, I think you should also be respectful about it, and you should try to have a take that is more nuanced